Society's increasing use of technology through the years has massively changed the way people live and move in the world, as many aspects of our lives are now being transformed into data. Datafication, the processes by which data are extracted from our everyday behaviors, is advancing rapidly. This era of datafication has been called many names: the big data revolution, the second machine age, the fourth industrial revolution, and more. But what does all this really mean? The human impact of datafication is far from universally positive, and this is where data justice comes in. In India, the biometric digital identity Aadhaar database has become one of the most controversial digital ID systems worldwide. Critics have pointed out that it disproportionately impacts India's poor, who have to travel long distances to apply for an ID. In Indonesia, personal data stored on the COVID-19 eHack app was leaked online, raising concerns about the balance between mitigating COVID transmissions and protecting people's privacy. In the United States, policing algorithms used to predict defendants' likelihood of reoffending have been found to be plagued by significant racial biases, wrongly labeling Black defendants as future criminals at almost twice the rate of white defendants. These cases of injustice are not unusual and are continuing to escalate worldwide. With the urgency of this problem in mind, the Data Justice Project was born. In 2021, the Global Partnership on AI, a multi-stakeholder initiative on artificial intelligence, chose the Alan Turing Institute to lead a project they had begun on data justice.
So right from the start, building on the groundbreaking work of the Data Justice Lab at Cardiff and the Global Data Justice Project at Tilburg, we knew that it would be inadequate and misguided for us to approach the subject matter from a largely Anglo-European-centered perspective. It had become immediately apparent to us that what we actually needed to do was to foreground, center, and amplify non-Western and non-global North voices that have all too often been excluded from data policy environments. This wider circle of perspectives is crucial because datafication simply isn't impacting everybody around the world equally. And current conversations around equitable data practices aren't adequately engaging with those who are actually impacted by such global harms.
With the help of additional funding from the UK government, the Global Partnership on AI and the Turing team were able to expand this project. It now includes 12 partner organizations around the world, working to understand what data justice might look like in their distinct contexts. This series of films tells the story of data justice and injustice from their perspectives.
Data is a elementary description of an object, of a person, of a transaction.
Data can be any type of information on anyone. It can be your name, it can be your address, it can be your date of birth.
Often, data are assumed to be objective facts about people and the world. But processes of data collection and use are, at the end of the day, social processes with their own unique histories and legacies. And these histories and legacies are not only drawn into the reality of data extraction, they shape the creation of the categories that give data meaning.
Every day when we interact with the online world, we leave traces behind. The videos we look at, the newsletters we sign up to, what websites we're visiting, what Google terms we put in. Now, if you systematically, constantly collect all that data over a long period of time, you can really tell things about people's preferences and behavior that they might show.
I believe data means power, especially nowadays we're seeing increasing trends of companies and governments trying to collect more and more data about ourselves, ranging from what we eat, what we buy, what we read, and probably even what we think now.
When we go online, we don't realize often that all this data is being collected. So that's where it gets tricky, that we're being judged based upon facts that we have not voluntarily given.
The defining role data can play in people's social, economic, cultural, and political lives is clear. The manner in which data is collected, processed, and shared is therefore of great consequence. And that is where data justice becomes crucial.
The combination of this word data with justice immediately suggests the need to pursue fair, equitable, and non-discriminatory uses of our data. Data justice is a movement which advocates for applying the principles of social justice to all instances of data collection and use. In other words, data collection and use must not undermine the pursuit of a society that is equitable, fair, and capable of confronting the root causes of injustice.
Advocates of data justice must consider how the rise of data-driven technologies, extending to every corner of the planet, presents challenges to this vision. Data-driven technologies are contributing to expanding inequality, gender-based discrimination, race-based discrimination, human rights violations, climate degradation, and more. When we asked members of the public what values might lie at the core of data justice, fairness, equity, transparency, individual and community rights, power, and agency all came out as central. But how do these values of data justice actually manifest in everyday life? The truth is, data justice can and should mean something different to different people.
Data justice means in China is more, but probably much more put right as data for good or data for common good. What common good means probably needed to be better defined in a context of China. Probably much more now it's more focused on commercial terms, much more focused on economic benefits, but also it can be focused on some kind of social benefits that people may not really talk about yet.
I think the way communities maybe in the north and also maybe the one in maybe Africa or Uganda would define data justice is very different. And also from the experience we have had from the research we have conducted, because we worked with impacted communities, we worked with developers and also the policymakers. So we found out that actually the way policymakers define data justice is quite different from the way the impacted communities define data justice. For example, the impacted communities that we worked with, like women, persons with disability, the LGBTI community, define data justice as inclusion and also the ability to access data and use it easily.
In rural Cameroon now, as it is the case in rural sub-Saharan Africa in general, communities will define data justice as first the means, access to means to produce data. And to produce data is one point, and another point is also to control data. But we have first to start with the productions of data, so means to produce data. Having said that, we should keep aware that this is mainly for rural areas. And now, considering the diversity in Africa, we should also be aware that this definition can significantly be different from one community to another one. Cultural background really influence the definitions of data justice.
Data justice and the paths to get there looks different depending on who you ask. This means it is crucial that debates on how to advance data justice allow all voices to be heard. In the context of dominant global power structures, this requires us to do more than simply expand the scope of debate. We must fundamentally relocate the where, the when, and the who of data justice. First, the debate on data justice needs to be relocated spatially so as to shift from a predominantly Eurocentric focus to one that actively spotlights non-Western realities and global Southern perspectives.
The debates right now are centered in the big three, as I call them, regions that are actually producing these tools and consuming data and exporting data, which is the US, Europe, and China. That tends to be the dominant voices that we have in these discussions. Generally, when the issue involves development goals, for example, then they will include people in the global south, or when the issues involve bias on a larger scale, then maybe they'll include voices from the global south, but it's not often that we are seen as primary players and always have a seat at the table regardless of the topic. This tends to result in a skewed perception of what data justice or AI really means to Africa and its people, mainly because we are not given a chance to completely give our views on any particular topic.
This global shift must be complemented by other relocations. Relocation must center marginalized areas within nations in high, middle, and low-income countries. Patterns of inequality that affect vulnerable groups within low and middle-income countries are only compounded by wider inequities. For these groups, a shift to the global south would be inadequate. We must also shift our focus to rural areas, to digitally uncharted territories within cities, to areas beset with digital divides, and more.
The global south, for me, seems too global to be handled. And that's why it is important to redefine the granularities and no longer about countries, but now about areas, and to speak about now a more developed area and less developed areas.
We have around 5,000 municipalities in Brazil. This is a very big number that represents a lot of diversity in our population.
Data injustice or data justice in China, I think we have less attention paid into the rural areas, especially like in western part of China, where people have less access to the technology and have less knowledge about the digital world.
Debates on the topic of data justice do not only need to be relocated spatially, they must also be transported in time. The problem of data injustice is not one which has emerged from nowhere in the last 10 years of the supposed big data revolution. Instead, patterns of injustice have compounded on top of one another over generations of data collection and use.
Data justice or data injustices link in with colonization. Well, if we take a very short cut through history, we can tell that colonization has started since the 16th century with the expansion of European countries to the rest of the globe. And ever since that movement, we could say that the global north has been dominating the economy, and most of the world now is in a capitalistic system where money basically is the main determining factor for success.
I do believe there are long-term trends of injustice that have led to our current landscape of data, our current knowledge or lack thereof on data and data justice. I believe colonial effects permeate every strata of society in Kenya. So whether it is the lack of adequate digital infrastructure, the lack of adequate digital knowledge or education or training. These are the effects, or at least indirect effects of our colonial history.
Not only are the injustices caused by big data rooted in the past, so too is our mission to advance data justice. The fight for data justice is part of longer-term struggles for fairness and equity and can gain much momentum by building upon the work of previous efforts to advance these values. There is still one final site of broadening necessary to advance data justice. We must rethink who gets to shape the data justice agenda. Initially, data justice was defined by academic scholars. However, if these groups continue to dominate discussions on data justice, we will miss out on valuable insights and experiences from those who have been most impacted by data injustice.
It's important that the conversations around data justice start from the ground up. Mainly because what tends to happen is we have the same voices involved, whether it's discussions about data governance or discussions about development of AI tools or discussions on data processes.
The voices that are currently participating and are more visible in the debates on digital rights in Chile are members of Congress, academics that are experts on data, and the main nonprofits that work on digital rights. I would like to include in that discussion in the future other kinds of organizations that represent different interests in society. For example, women's rights, indigenous peoples, immigrants. All these groups also need to participate in the debate about data because data represents them. Data about them is used to make decisions.
We must rethink who the agents of data justice are. Amplifying a chorus of new voices and perspectives will allow us to learn from the collective wisdom and practical knowledge of all individuals and communities who are impacted by datafication. All episodes in this series tell the story of data justice from the perspectives of organizations working around the world to undo generations of injustice. Join us for 3 more episodes exploring the on-the-ground realities of data justice and injustice. First, we will explore the human impact of past data injustices.
So in China, we see big platforms like Meituan or Ele.me that they are using algorithm trying to control how fast the food delivery workers to deliver the foods to the customers.
Then, we will look to the present issues facing activists around the world.
We think that Africa is at a turning point on the issue of AI and data justice.
Finally, we will look to the future of the data justice movement and the actions we must prioritize now.
I think the biggest work in the Asia Pacific lying ahead is creating awareness around societies of the countries here that data is being collected in numerous ways, and that the data that's being collected is being analyzed, is being researched, and that those people in power that collect all this data can really use that in ways that you might not be in agreement with.